Real stories of werewolves, of dogmen from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
A real British werewolf. Picture this. A nurse takes a break from her work in the hospital and heads outside on a cool, foggy British night to have herself a smoke. While she's enjoying the night and her solitude, the nurse suddenly hears something coming from the dark nearby. Something horrible that happened to a woman in this hospital's parking lot about 2 years prior, and the nurse suddenly realized that she could very well be in danger. Straining to see in the direction she had heard the strange sound coming from, the woman thought she could make out the figure of a man. It was too hard to see, but she resolved to finish her smoke anyway. Still, she kept an eye on that figure, and it did seem to be approaching her. Soon enough, the individual in question was close enough that the nurse could see that there was something wrong here. Although the size and shape of a man, the figure was hunched over and held what looked like claws in front of itself. The nurse was no longer so certain that she was looking at a man. The shambling, hunching, lurching beast appeared somewhat more like a werewolf in silhouette. Just then, the nurse heard growling, snarling animal noises emanating from the night, and she wondered what was going to happen next. Dramatic, huh? But it's supposed to be true. This is my adaptation of a scene from the Ed and Lorraine Warren book entitled Werewolf, a true story of demonic possession. It's a book based on a real werewolf case I'm about to get into a little bit here, but the book is written in the style of a novel for the most part. If you'd like to learn more about it, we've got a link to buy that book from Barnes & Noble in our description. If you do choose to snag yourself one from that link, in theory you're helping out our channel as well, because they will hopefully toss us a few shekels if you do. The book gets into how Ed and Lorraine Warren heard of this British werewolf, and then they declared him demonically possessed and gave him an exorcism. I think it's one of the strangest stories of my lifetime, so why don't I explain what I'm talking about? Well, what I'm talking about is a guy from England named Bill Ramsey, who really freaked out, really behaved like a werewolf, and really seemed to have superhuman strength when he was the werewolf. The first episode in which the young British man demonstrated that he was some kind of a creature happened in 1981. While in a vehicle with some other young men, Ramsey began snarling like an animal and even bit one of the other guys on the leg. I'm trying to imagine what that scene must have been like. The vehicle pulled off the road and everyone jumped out, including Bill Ramsey, who was once again fine, and just as confused about what had just happened as anyone else. He remembered none of it. After the guys described what he had done, Ramsey recalled that when he was a boy of only 9, his parents told him he had gone on a rampage one afternoon. Both his parents got very frightened. Bill himself had nearly forgotten the incident since it only happened once and never repeated itself. But after what happened with these other young men, the details came back to Ramsey about his childhood event. According to the way his parents had explained it to him, young Bill tore a fence post that was embedded in concrete clean out of the ground and swung it around like a weapon. This would have been quite a feat even for a young adult to do, but a 9-year-old certainly could not have normally done what Bill had done. I can imagine the situation must have seemed very scary at the time, because both parents ran into the house, locking their own son outside, until well after he had proven to them that he was calm again. Neither young Bill nor his parents ever found out why that incident happened, but since it never repeated, it was eventually forgotten. Until the 1981 incident, obviously. But that also proved to be a one-off as well, and that was brushed off and forgotten too. Until a couple years later, that is in 1983, when Bill suddenly began having bad chest pains. He brought himself to that hospital with that nurse I mentioned earlier. But once he got there and began to receive treatment, Bill Ramsey became the werewolf. He snarled. He growled. He bit a nurse. The police were called and he fought them off while down on all fours. One of the police was so injured by Bill that the cop ended up staying in that hospital as a patient for days afterward. Eventually, it took a handful of trained police officers working in tandem to handcuff the creature that Bill had become. That didn't serve to calm him, though, and he had to be sedated before he could be removed to a high-security facility. But once he had been brought there, Bill was calm again, confused about what was going on. He seemed fine, and so once again he was released. Now, Ramsey himself was a calm and thoughtful man when he wasn't under attack from whatever caused this. That's the most interesting part of the story to me, that he would suddenly be so mild-mannered that everyone would forgive him and release him to do it all over again. Nobody seemed to have any doubt that he was innocent of his misdeeds, to a greater extent than in any story I've ever heard in my life. I found an episode of a 1990 British TV series in which Ramsey himself appears, and he tells us that before he would change, he would feel, quote, just sort of your stomach tearing apart, and the painful feeling of anger and rage that would build up inside you. You can't describe it to anybody. It's just too much to describe. That quote is from True or False, the Southend Werewolf, and we have a link to it in the description. So once again, things calmed down for Bill Ramsey until suddenly in July 1987, he had another relapse. And this time, the police had to lock him into a cell to stop him from hurting himself and others. Tony Telford of the Southend Police stated on camera that he saw Bill Ramsey on the chest of a fallen police officer, with his hands wrapped tightly around the officer's throat, strangling him. Telford called for help, and he said it took 5 or 6 officers to stop Ramsey from killing that other policeman, and to get him into a cell. Sounds like a scene from a Hammer horror film. On this same British documentary program, that officer shows us the cell Ramsey was thrown into, which had a door with a small window on it. This is a screen capture from that show. This is the actual door to the cell. And through that little piece of glass, maybe a foot wide and not even that tall, somehow, the werewolf version of Bill Ramsey had managed to get his head and one arm and shoulder out through that small opening. And he was attacking officers on the other side of the door. Sounds like a scene from a Joker sequel, doesn't it? The officer says that Ramsey held his hands in the shape of claws, and when anyone would get close enough, he would attempt to scratch or claw at them, not to punch or strike like a human normally would. He also had his lip curled back to show his teeth threateningly the way an angry dog would do it, and he was heard growling like a beast. Then the prison surgeon was called out, and he administered a shot to Ramsey that should have knocked him out. Ramsey continued to thrash about in the hole in his cell door until the surgeon succeeded in giving twice the amount of the drug that would normally have been needed. Once Bill was finally unconscious, it took 5 grown men using soap to try to pull him back out of that door he had gotten himself stuck inside of. My apologies for laughing. After this, Ramsey's face got plastered on the front pages of newspapers all over England, with the headlines screaming that he was a real werewolf. Being a sensitive and emotional sort of guy, though, Bill got all sad and emo about it. He said he was scared to walk outside and be recognized as the infamous werewolf of Southend. The scariest part for him was that he would never remember what had happened when he would wake up. He would never know what terrible thing he had done, while his consciousness seemed to have left his own body, or possibly gone to sleep inside. By this point, the authorities were being pressured to do something about him, so Ramsey got sent to Runwell Hospital multiple times. Once he was locked up in there for almost an entire month, but the doctors were never able to understand what his problem was, or why these attacks seemed to be getting more violent each time. Since Ramsey, like every other working-class man in the 20th century, enjoyed getting drunk once in a while, the doctors thought maybe the lycanthropy had something to do with alcoholism. Ramsey said no, though, because he had some attacks when he was stone-cold sober. Neither alcohol nor the phases of the moon seemed to have anything to do with his problems. So Bill Ramsey developed a relationship with those same police he had attacked. When he started to feel cold or nauseous, he would have them lock him up for the night in a maximum security cell. At least that way he would know that nobody would get hurt during that night. So, in all the publicity surrounding this situation, Bill got asked to appear in a short film that got shown back here in America. Among those who saw that short film were the now very famous Ed and Lorraine Warren. When they looked at the film, they didn't think he was a werewolf. Ed and Lorraine Warren thought that Bill Ramsey was possessed by a demon. They contacted Bill and asked him to come to Connecticut, where they would attempt an exorcism to drive the demon from his body. Now, Bill seems to have thought this sounded quite crazy. He refers to the Warrens dismissively as Ghostbusters in the British TV show I've been referencing. I don't think he put much weight into their ideas of demons possessing humans. But on the other hand, the Warrens were offering him a free round trip to America, which is a country he was never going to have a chance to visit otherwise. It was a hard offer to turn down, and in fact, he didn't. He accepted the offer, and so off on his free trip to America went the Southend Werewolf, on his way to meet Ed and Lorraine Warren themselves. "Hey Bill, how did you get to travel to America and meet these famous people?" "Well, that's easy. I attacked and bit nurses and policemen for a few years until they gave me the free trip." Well, we all have our own journeys in life, and Bill Ramsey is sure proof of that. So they brought him to a church, and Connecticut Bishop McKenna appeared before Bill and began chanting in Latin. Bill, of course, being a working-class guy, thought this was all very strange, and he did not expect much to happen. However, to his surprise, Bill felt himself going cold. He felt one of his attacks coming on. Here's an actual photo from the event, and you can see Bill's hands curl into claw-like shapes. You can see that he is in great distress. Bill does not remember what else happened, but he says he woke up again feeling as though something very evil had left him. Apparently, the bishop had commanded the demon to leave while Bill was unconscious, and Ramsey woke up feeling as though it had. When he got back to England, Bill Ramsey found the newspapers now covering the story of the brave American bishop who dared to stand up to the Southend werewolf and drive the demon from his body, saving the soul of Southend's own Bill Ramsey. Since returning to England from that trip, Ramsey never had another attack. Whatever the Warrens and the bishop in Connecticut had done, it had freed Bill Ramsey from his life of torment. I'm going to interject some of my own opinion here. I think that whether Ramsey was literally possessed by an actual demon or whether he was haunted by demons of some other more internal kind, the rituals performed not just by the bishop, but also by the media in reinforcing the myth behind the story, helped drive the werewolf away. In my mind, it literally doesn't matter if the werewolf was a mental problem locked in Ramsey's subconscious or a demon from hell attached to his soul. I think that in either case, a high-ranking bishop, combined with an international media announcing that a demon had been driven away, was a combination of enough things to eliminate any more werewolf events in Ramsey's life. Would it work as well today, with faith in all our institutions at such a low ebb? I don't know. Maybe it still would have, as long as the bishop spoke in Latin, not in everyday English. Am I saying Latin is more magical than English? No, of course not. But it's more mysterious sounding to a regular guy. It sounds ancient and sounds magical. And when we're dealing with an affliction of the soul or an affliction of the subconscious mind, ancient and magical sounding things can sometimes actually perform what might otherwise be considered miracle transformations. I think as long as I word that cautiously enough, at least some medical professionals might even agree with my statement. This is why doctors will sometimes give you a sugar pill if they think you're having a psychosomatic illness. Just like the shamans that preceded them, good modern doctors know that most of the process of healing is up to you, not to them. The wise ones, and I expect there are at least a few of the wise ones possibly still left around, know that half their job is to convince the patient that they can get well, so that they're working with the doctor to effect positive change. Because the smart doctors realize that we still don't really understand enough to fully explain all the crazy things that can happen to a person. Like what happened to Bill Ramsey, who for years and years was cursed to be the werewolf of Southend. Our thanks for him goes on and on. I'm talking about John Carnagon. Our executive producer tonight is John Carnagon, who gave us a super thanks the other night. You too can donate to us using our super thanks button under any of our YouTube videos. Jefferson Square of Weirdness. Welcome to Scary Stories. People seem to respond positively to our recent episode about the strange and unique Dogman sightings by Mark Shackleman from 1936. The story was a Shackleman family secret until Mark's son Joe revealed it all to Linda Godfrey 6 decades later, in the 1990s. In that episode, we examined the newspaper obituary of the son Joe Shackleman, who it turned out was a locally famous journalist, known for publishing investigative pieces about crime bosses. He had a reputation for honesty and had won awards for his investigative journalism, and he had no qualms at all about excitedly contacting his fellow journalist, the late Linda Godfrey, when he saw her on television along with a drawing of the Beast of Bray Road. He then spilled the beans about his father's 1936 sighting of a werewolf-type dogman who scratched at the earth on the top of an ancient burial mound and uttered the word Gadara at the father, Mark Shackleman, who was working as a night watchman at the time on the grounds of the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in Jefferson County, Wisconsin. The case may be the first famous 20th century dogman sighting on the one hand, but it's also got a lot of spookiness all around it. Could it have been a sighting of a previously unrecognized hominid or upright walking canine? Well, I can't say it would be impossible, but the entire story seems somehow stranger than that. The beast appears on a sacred native burial ground. Both the Shacklemans were devoutly religious. The creature says a word that is also the name of a location of one of the strangest stories in the Bible. A story in which Jesus was said to have exorcised multiple demons out of a man or men who had been living in the crypts among the dead. It doesn't just feel like a sighting of an out-of-place animal to me. Of course, I used to be a member of the New York Fortean Society, and I got to be friends with people like John Keel, the journalist, writer, comedian, and stage magician, who coined the term window area in the first place. He used the term to refer to places where not one, but many strange things happen. Like Skinwalker Ranch, for instance, if you follow any of that. They do tell a few stories that sound to me like dogman or werewolf stories from that ranch. But there's also video of UFOs, stories about disembodied voices, dangerous glowing orbs of light that can kill, and all sorts of other inexplicable stuff. Keel had noticed that if you go to an area where something strange was reported, you often find any number of other strange cases from that same place. He had gone to Point Pleasant, West Virginia to investigate UFO sightings, or UFO as he used to say. He came away with the Mothman prophecies, which is certainly not what he had gone there to write. My other friend from the old Fortean Society days, Tim Beckley, used to tell me how he would ask open-ended questions to let the witness steer the conversation. Like one time he heard there was a big UFO sighting in an area near where he was, so he drove to the neighborhood, then started ringing doorbells. He would explain he was a writer from New York who wrote about strange phenomena, then ask if they had seen anything out of the ordinary recently. He never mentioned UFOs, so that he wouldn't be leading them on. One person took him around to the side of his house, pointed at a leaking air conditioner up on the second floor window, and told Tim that a Bigfoot would come by sometimes in the warmer evenings and drink the water leaking from the air conditioner. If Tim had asked the guy to tell him about UFOs, he never would have gotten that crazy, but apparently very true Bigfoot story. So I shouldn't have been surprised when the chapter after the one about the Gadara werewolf from 1936 in Linda Godfrey's book Real Wolfmen, which you can buy at the link in the description, it helps this channel out if you do that. started off with a quote from John Keel himself, explaining what happens near window areas. From time to time, the playful inhabitants of that other world climb through the curtains and the areas we call windows, and they stalk us to drink our blood and create all kinds of mischievous beliefs and misconceptions in our feeble little terrestrial minds. That's John Keel from the Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings. So although we might know Jefferson County most for the Shackleman family dogman story, that doesn't mean the weirdness stops there. I mean, this place has been marked off as special since ancient times. This is where Aztalan State Park is, which used to be a Native American fortress with its own flat-topped multi-layered mound that still stands to this day. Aztalan isn't far from Rock Lake, which is famous, or infamous, for a number of reasons. It's rumored to have small stone pyramids or teepees at the lake bottom, but the water is so dark and murky that nobody so far has proven or disproven that legend. Rock Lake has also been said to have a monster living in it, like a local Wisconsin Nessie. I remember talking with Keel about Loch Ness. He kind of felt as though the loch had an underwater window in it, like a portal or opening between realities or maybe time frames. This would explain why the creature would seem very real and very solid to people sometimes, but then go missing when being searched for later on. Linda Godfrey makes a strong argument for the square-looking Jefferson County to actually be not so much the home of a species of werewolves, but possibly more of a window area in which dogmen and all sorts of other cryptids waltz into and out of whenever they feel like it. Or maybe it's unintentional on their part. Maybe it's more of a David Paulides missing 411 thing, with the creatures walking into our reality without knowing they're doing it. Well, I suppose it could be a bit of both, couldn't it? So let's go down the list of weirdnesses that Linda Godfrey gathered for Jefferson County, and then by the end you can tell me if you think this is a window area or portal area, or not. Let's start off with Paradise Road. Now, Paradise Road doesn't sound so heavenly to me. It's known as a haunted road according to Linda Godfrey, and she received one report from Paradise Road of a creature that the witness described as demonic. It stood on the ground off the road, and it was man-sized, but it was a bird, and had large red glowing eyes. Does that not sound like a description of the West Virginia Mothman? It does to me. I know I would have kept driving, that's for sure. I believe I should note here that Paradise Road is 10 minutes away or 13 minutes away from St. Coletta's, depending on whether you go north of the Big Swamp or south of the Big Swamp. Either way, that area is dominated by a big spooky swamp, and it seems to me that there's always a swamp or two in any window area, isn't there? Now, another big spot over there is State Highway Wisconsin 106. Route 106 is haunted too, but the creatures that haunt this place seem more like Bigfoot or possibly Googway dogmen to me, from the way they're described in Godfrey's book. Let's list off a few Route 106 encounters and sightings over the years. 1972. A woman saw a large hairy biped on her farm. Soon afterward, her horse was attacked by some kind of a predator. Godfrey says that the story was backed up by an agent of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources who vouched for the credibility of the witness. Skipping forward to 1980. A fisherman named Ronald Nixon was fishing in the Bark River south of Route 106 when he said he got stared down by some kind of a hairy two-legged animal on the other shore. 1992. Tom Brichta and Chris Maxwell see a hairy biped on Route 106, again just outside of Fort Atkinson. When you look at the map over there, it's all farmland and some houses. When they talk about seeing the creature walk out over into a tree line, I see only one patch of trees, and that is just immediately east of the town. If the creature were crossing there, though, It would be walking in the direction of some big swampy areas. In fact, it would have been heading down toward the Adam Birding Conservatory, the Prince's Point Wildlife Area, and of course the Bark River, where witness Ronald Nixon said he got stared down by a big hairy biped in 1980. In 1993, a fellow named Andrew Hurd encountered what he called a Bigfoot inside his family's barn near Hebron, Wisconsin. I'd be like, "Sorry to disturb you in your barn, Mr. Bigfoot, sir," and then I'd get out of there. 2005, a guy named Eric Binney and a friend saw a weirdly large four-legged canine with glowing yellow eyes, this time just south of Jefferson on County Road N. 5 years after that, July 15th, 2010, a middle-aged woman who chose to remain anonymous said she saw Bigfoot crossing Route 106 in broad daylight at 4 p.m. Again, it was walking down toward the Bark River area. And Linda Godfrey notes that this is just where there used to be mounds which were done away with in earlier times to create more farmland. Maybe those mounds, or whatever they were actually there to mark, are still there, at least for those with eyes to see. Speaking of which, have you ever seen that channel on YouTube called The Archivist with Analog? I don't know if his theories hold water or not because it's not my area of expertise, but he thinks that the mounds actually marked entrances to some kind of transportation system, possibly a tunnel system. But I'm thinking, what if they marked entrances to window areas or portals? We know burials were made in the mounds, but was that their original purpose? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe you know more than I do. And if so, please share what you know in the comments. There's another aspect to locations like this in which so many different bizarre phenomena seem to exist next to each other. There's no way that many large predators could survive together in such a small area. And how would the population breed? Where would they live if they did? Certainly not in the farmlands of the Midwest. Even inside those swamps, there isn't enough room for so many beastmen. Unless those swamps or the areas around them are actually more like doorways, letting things in and out that don't really belong here with the rest of us. There was a reason John Keel was respected, even by geniuses like Jacques Vallée, who he is shown here with. The one time I got to meet Vallée, he and I spoke of John Keel. Vallée worked for the CIA along with Ingo Swann back in the day doing a remote viewing at the Stanford Research Institute. He was then, after that, one of the people who created the internet. Vallée said at that event I attended with Tim Beckley some years back that the conscious universe seems to function like an internet search engine. You put in some kind of an address, or a description of that address, and the search engine finds whatever it can that seems to match what you're asking for. Sometimes that address is in the past, or the present, or the future, because as it turns out, all of it is happening at the same time. Wait, did that just make sense or was that gibberish? I'm not sure why, but I think there's some kind of an answer to all of this in that gibberish I was just uttering. Then again, maybe it was just gobbledygook after all. But what isn't gobbledygook is our special executive producer tonight. Here to tell you all about her is Mr. Bigfoot himself. Biggie. She is strong and never falters. Tonight's EP is Ginny Walters. Please join me in thanking the kind and generous executive producer of tonight's episode, Ginny Walters, for donating to us using the thanks button on YouTube. Thank you, Ginny. And here to explain how you too can become one of our executive producers is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.